Well, welcome back to the channel, Old Cars, New Van, and in this video I'm going to look at the cars of my childhood. This was sort of inspired by the recent series of videos that I did about cars that I've owned throughout my life, and I thought I'd just do one standalone video about significant cars of my childhood. So I'm going to do Mum, Dad, and friends of Mum and Dad, particularly cars that I went to school in, because for reasons I won't bore you with, my school was quite a way away from where I lived. So let's start with Dad. Why not? First car I have any sort of recollection of is this white Ford Cortina. This is a G-Reg, which dates it in the UK market somewhere between August 68 and July 69. I was born in 69. Dad never bought brand new cars, or very rarely. I think he bought one in his entire life. He wasn't really a car person. They didn't really interest him. They were just functional, getting him from A to B. So they were never desperately exciting cars. But as I say, this is the first car that I can remember. And this photo probably dates from a holiday in the very early 70s, maybe 72, something like that. And I can tell you without even knowing that it's got to be the south of France, because it was always the south of France. So this photo is on a beach somewhere in the south of France in the trusty white Ford Cortina. Dad always said he never liked this car. I think it's quite cool, actually. This is the only photograph I've got of it, so it's not a particularly great photo, but at least it's the actual car itself. The car he replaced that with, and I think he didn't quite realise what he was buying, because it was so unlike my father to buy anything that had sport written after it, but he bought a 1750 Sport Austin Allegro. Perhaps it was made up for the fact that it was an Allegro. Maybe that cancelled out the sport bit. Anyway, a really early one, first year of production or second year, 1974, something like that. 1750 Sport. Now, this was at the time where Allegros were going through all the odd features and faults that got them the rather unfortunate reputation that they had. And I can confirm that I was in this car when the wheel fell off. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, there was a problem with the rear bearings, I think, the wheel nuts that were tightened, the hub nut that was tightened too tight on the early production cars, which over time caused the wheel and the whole hub to actually detach through friction. And yeah, I was in an Austin Allegro and the wheel fell off. That's my claim to fame. I think his also had the quadratic steering wheel, the square steering wheel on it. So as I say, an early production car. And he kept that till 1977, when he bought the first of two Chrysler Alpines that he had. He bought a yellow one. We used to call it the banana. I think it was an R-Reg, so that would place it, to 77, wouldn't it? Yeah, I mean, they were quite noisy, the engines on these, but they were relatively roomy cars. So for somebody who's not particularly interested in cars, like my dad wasn't, they represented quite a good practical car. Obviously a hatchback, which again in those days was a relatively new concept, and he quite liked them. So much so that in 1979, he actually bought another one. Apparently the story goes that the yellow one was in for servicing and at the main dealer, and they made him a silly offer to change to a brand new one, and this is the only brand new car he ever bought in his whole life. 1979 white Chrysler Alpine. Rather bizarrely, the first day he had it, he put it in the garage and hand painted, bearing in mind this is a brand new car, hand painted those sort of white plastic bumpers black. He thought it looked odd against the white paintwork. He thought it worked with the yellow one that he had, but with the white paintwork he didn't think it worked, so he hand painted them black. I can't tell as a young child whether that was a good or a bad job, but it seemed a pretty odd thing to do on a brand new car, but there we go. So as far as reg numbers were concerned, I can't remember my dad's first three, but I remember the white Alpine was LLG 205T. So he kept that for, say, another 3 years, and then he bought a 1981 Austin Princess 2-litre HLS in beige with a vinyl roof. And I remember the reg number of the Princess being Mud 500W. He always maintains this is the most comfortable car he's ever owned. I remember it rusting quite early on. I wasn't a fan, as you can probably tell. But as I say, he thought it was a very comfortable car. I remember it had armrests that folded out of the front seats. That was the one novelty factor of it. So this now takes us to probably, let me see, kept that quite a long time, maybe 1986 he kept that too. By which time I was 16, so this next car is going to be the last car that I refer to, because this is, as I say, cars of childhood, not adulthood. But I'd actually, got quite into cars myself, or reading about them and understanding what was good and bad, and I convinced him to buy the Audi 80, which is what he replaced the Austin Princess with. I remember I tried with the Princess, but I was too young. I really wanted him to buy a Saab 99 GL. That was the car that I'd sort of almost got him interested in, but he didn't take me seriously at age 11, whereas at age 16 he did vaguely listen. And as I say, best car, in my opinion, he ever had, the Audi 80 GL, which of course I later bought off him. And of course I can remember the reg number of the Audi, B619 GRP. So turning now to Mum, the first car I can ever remember that Mum had was this white Viva HB. Again, must have been tail end of the 60s, but she'll have had it in the early 70s. Don't have great recollection of it because I was very young. But I remember her pulling onto the driveway with a flat tyre. So that there are some childhood memories there. And she was quite taken with the Vivas. In fact, when that was due for replacement, she swapped it to another one, a red Viva HC, LMA 272P. That's probably the earliest car that I can actually remember the registration number of. So yeah, the red Viva, quite a late HC Viva, being on a P, which is that, 76, 77, sort of year of production, round about there. And she swapped that out in about 1980, it must have been, for a 1978 Chrysler Horizon. So at the same time as my dad had Chrysler Alpines, my mum was running a Chrysler Horizon. So we were a Chrysler family, Chrysler of Europe, that is. Nothing to do with the Chrysler in America. I remember that was a terrible car, the Horizon. It was constantly breaking down and constantly giving her problems. But as I say, childhood memory, I remember going to school in it an awful lot. When that was due for expiry, she bought her first brand new car, which was a Nissan Cherry. This is 1984 A-Reg, A323 VDM, blue Nissan Cherry 5-door. Reliable compared with the Horizon. Had a very unusual system where you could manually lock the rear doors with two levers in between the two front seats. It was almost like a primitive early version of sort of central locking. No other electrics on the car. But yeah, proved a reliable car. She did a lot of miles in that car, I seem to remember, because of her work at the time. And it's also the very first car that I drove that. Before I passed my test, I drove it on L plates just to get a bit of experience before I started having proper driving lessons. So yeah, I remember the Cherry quite well. And again, just at the end of what I would call childhood, she sold the Cherry after about 4 years and bought a Vauxhall Nova. because I don't think she was doing as many miles then, so she wanted something smaller just to work around town, and that was a pretty bog standard 1.2 Merit or something, Vauxhall Nova. But again, she bought that brand new, and that rounds out her car. Let me see, I think it was F467HFM from memory, the reg number of that Nova. So I'm now going to turn to friends of my parents, their cars, only because they're significant in as much of they were cars that I went to school in. Bearing in mind we were doing sort of a round trip of about 50 miles every day to go to school. You can imagine I did quite a lot of miles as a passenger as a kid in some of these cars, so they are quite sort of sealed into my memory. And we had a sort of rota system with some other families who lived close by to take their kids and me to school. One of the first I can remember was this sort of four-door white Morris Marina. That belonged to the Kellets, who were neighbours of ours whose kids went to the same school. And yeah, I remember going up and down the Wirral. We were living in Chester at the time, going to school in this car. They seem to have that forever. It was an old car, really old car when they were running it into the sort of the 80s, and but yeah, some other cars that spring to mind as well are Maestro. One of our the Watts family had a Maestro, and they replaced that with an Austin Ambassador. My goodness me. So yeah, significant cars for going to school in, but probably the one that sticks in the most. There was a family called the Jenkins, and they had really cool cars, so I was quite envious because they always seem to have really, really interesting cars. So I used to really look forward to when it was their turn to do the school run. I remember Mr. Jenkins had a really old 7 Series BMW. It was like a 1978 S-Reg, so one of the very early ones actually, but it was beautiful, and it felt so well built and so powerful, and really fast on the acceleration. That was a lovely car, that was. I really loved going in that. And then his wife had a BMW 5 Series, really early one, something like a 1976 on the N-Reg. So they had older cars, but really good quality cars. And then Mr. Jenkins also had a hobby car, which he sometimes used to take us to school in, and that was a Datsun 240. How cool was that? Turn up to school in one of those. He obviously only took it when there was only sort of 2 or 3 of us actually on the school run, because others had left school by then. So that was a bit later on. But yeah, what a fantastically cool car that was to go to school in. I remember sometimes his mum as well took us to school when they were busy and they couldn't make the run. And she also had an interesting car. She had a little Fiat 128 Coupe. Again, a real left field choice. But yeah, great fun. And then he had 2 boys who went to the same school, and as they got older, they started and had passed their test at sort of 17. They started doing a bit of the driving as well. So I remember the younger lad had an Allegro Estate car. Not sure that was such a great choice, but there we go. And his brother had a Marina Coupe, and I always thought that was quite cool actually, the coupe shape, even though Marina was still quite an ordinary car. I thought it was quite a nice shape. So yeah, those are the sort of cars of childhood and memory, both from school runs and also mum and dad. And I'll round off with, after driving Mum's Nissan Cherry on L plates, I got driving lessons as a birthday present. And I remember the learner car that I drove was the good old Nissan Micra. I think everybody at that generation, about 1987, learned to drive in one of those, didn't they? But I'll throw that in as the car to round out this collection of cars of my childhood before I started buying all my own silly cars and the journey began. Hope this was of some interest. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I'll see you again very soon for some other videos about some more up-to-date classic cars, like further adventures with our Rover. Okay, see you soon.